All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Once again, let me get some things in order here. Here we go. All right. So, as I mentioned a little earlier, today is the third Sunday of Advent, and Advent is a traditional focus on the spiritual adventure of preparing ourselves for a greater birthing of consciousness in us, for the Christ to be alive in us, to be born in us more fully. And being that the focus is on joy this week, I was reading this book of joy, the book of joy. It's a wonderful conversation between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. And the man who interviewed them and put the book together, Douglas Adams, he wrote, he said, after working with a number of spiritual leaders, I am tempted to say that a sense of humor is a universal indicator of spiritual elevation. Sense of humor is a universal indicator of spiritual elevation. You know, the Dalai Lama wrote an autobiography, and in his book, he says that everyone should let themselves be playful and find the funny in life. Find the funny in life. In fact, he calls himself a professional laugher. And he writes that, you know, he comes from a cheerful family that is always amusing ourselves, teasing each other, and joking. I love that. So, in that vein, I have a joke for you that one of my minister friends shared with me. And I wish at the end you would unmute so I could hear some laughter. So there were these two priests, and they died at the same time, and they met St. Peter at the pearly gates. And St. Peter said, I'd like to get you guys in now, but we've had this big snowstorm and our computers are down. So you'll have to go back to Earth for, about a week. But you can't go back as humans. So what'll it be? And the first priest says, oh, well, I've always wanted to be an eagle soaring above the Rocky Mountains. And St. Peter says, so be it. And off flies the first priest. And the second priest mulls this over for a moment and he asks, will you be keeping track of us, St. Peter? And St. Peter says, no, I told you the computer's down. There's no way to keep track of what you're doing. This week is a freebie. In that case, the second priest says, I've always wanted to be a stud. So be it, says St. Peter. And the second priest disappears. And after a week goes by, the computer's fixed, and God tells St. Peter to recall the two priests. And God says, will you have any trouble locating them? And St. Peter replies, well, the first one should be easy. He's somewhere over the Rocky Mountains flying with the eagles. But the second one could prove to be more difficult. And why is that? Asks God. Oh, because he's on a snow tire somewhere in Alaska.
Oh my
Oh, thank you so much for unmuting.
Oh, that's a good one, Kathy.
Oh, thank you. That feels good. Laughter's so healing. So there's joy, and then there's spiritual joy, which is kind of a specific kind of joy. There's a Sanskrit word called mudita. And mudita is a kind of spiritual joy that is filled with peace and contentment. It's a joyful goodwill. It's where we rejoice in our own well-being, and we rejoice when we see others happy. And we realize it's not disloyal to the suffering of the world to honor the happiness that we've been given. In fact, our world needs our joy. Our world needs our mudita. The Dalai Lama, he talks about the 8 pillars of joy, and 4 of them are qualities of our spiritual heart, and then 4 are qualities of spirit. And for today, I just want to explore the heart qualities. The 4 heart qualities are compassion, forgiveness, generosity, and gratitude. And the Buddha is quoted as saying, what is it that when you have provides you all other virtues? it is compassion. It is compassion. Compassion connects our inner empathy, our natural feeling of empathy, to outer acts of kindness and generosity. There's a beautiful story I recently read about a time when the world was young, and there were these two brothers, and they shared a field and a mill. And each night they would evenly divide the grain that they had ground together during the day. And as it happened, one of the brothers lived alone, and the other brother had a wife and a large family, bunch of kids. Well, one day the single brother thought to himself, it isn't really fair that we divide the grain evenly. I only have myself to care for, but my brother has all those children to feed. And so each night he secretly took some of his grain to his brother's granary to see that he was never without. But the married brother, with the big family, he thought to himself one day, it isn't really fair that we divide the grain evenly because I have children to provide for me in my old age. But my brother has no one. What will he do when he's old? And so every night he secretly took some of his grain to his brother's granary. And as a result, both of them always found their supply of grain mysteriously replenished. And so it happened that one night the brothers met each other halfway between their houses, and they suddenly realized what had been happening. And they embraced each other in a big, long embrace of love. And the story is that God witnessed their meeting and he proclaimed, "This is a holy place. This is a holy place of love, and this is where my temple shall be built." I love that story because the message is that the holy place is where God is known. The holy place where God is known is any place where human beings discover each other in love. And I had just written this talk, and I had written this story into my talk a few days ago when my brother stopped by, and we went for a walk in the park, my big brother. And, we were talking about my Highlander. I was going to, he wanted to buy my Highlander, and he asked what I was going to ask for it because I was going to put it on Craigslist. And I said, I'll sell it to you really cheap. And then, like, I thought about that story for a moment. I said, actually, no, I'm just going to give it to you for Christmas. And like he was just like overjoyed. And there was just this feeling of love that just came into my heart. And I just couldn't even help myself. I just felt, of course, I'm going to give it to you. And it's just such an amazing feeling. There is so much joy when our heart has no fear and no reservation, and it's just overwhelmed with generosity. That is the nature of the heart. The heart just wants to give. That's God is love, and our hearts are love. Our hearts are filled with love. And when we're in that mode of giving, I mean, the greatest giver in the world is the Creator, right? I mean, there's so much abundance in this creation. And so when we're giving, when we're generous, we are feeling ourselves as that Creator. We are feeling that flowing through us. We are inseparable from that. You know, um, Another little story at the YMCA here, there's a Christmas tree. And this year they put all these little tags on the tree for children from families that are in need. And each tag gives you a list of a child's name and their age and what they're in need of. And Chuck and I had so much fun looking at all the tags and choosing someone to go get a gift bag for. And I chose a little girl named Ruth, 8-year-old little girl that wore size 10. And I got her all these, I got her a lot of beautiful little clothes. And it just brings us so much joy, when we are in that mode of giving. And I think, it's because we feel spirit move in us, when there's no holding back, when there's just this overwhelming desire to bless. We feel the mudita, the spiritual joy. Um, and I was recently in a class studying the letters that Paul wrote to all the various churches, in the New Testament. And in Acts 20:35, he wrote, "Remember the words of Lord Jesus himself said, it is better to give than receive." It's better to give than receive. And I think the deeper understanding of this is that, you know, when our hearts want to bless, we're most fully being our divine nature. And that is pure bliss. That is pure bliss. Um, as I said before I sang that chant, Meister Eckhart, his quote is that it's not so much about Jesus's birth, his historical birth that we want to focus on and celebrate this time, but it's the birth in us, the birth that we feel when we're generous, when we're feeling compassion, when we let that light flow in us and through us, giving my brother that car, I just felt so much joy. It was just such a fulfilling feeling. In Buddhist teachings, I love to compare Buddhism and Christianity because there's so many similar teachings. But they talk about three forms of generosity. And they describe them as, number one, there's a material gift, and whether it's, the brother giving grain from the barn, or it's a, giving a new used car, if it's giving a winter coat, there's a material gift. And that is a kind of generosity. And then the second kind of generosity and gift is the gift of freeing someone from fear. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've been thinking that is such a gift to free someone from fear. It means offering protection or offering advice or consolation. When I had my oral surgery last month, the gift of the prayers that our prayer chaplains gave me, they really helped me so much. I drove up to Truckee to get that surgery, and Linda, on the way up, she was my passenger, and she just kept reading those prayers to me. She would say, "Do you want to hear them again?" I'd say, "Yes, let's hear them again." And it had the effect of freeing me from fear. So prayers are such a gift. And then the third kind of generosity is the spiritual gift, which is described as offering a transmission of wisdom, a sharing of moral and ethical teachings, a sharing of that which helps people towards more autonomy and happiness. I think of the teachings of non-attachment. Those are powerful teachings. The teachings of living simply, and being content with what you have. The teachings of learning to let go and trust spirit over and over. In our culture in the West, there's an excessive, I think, a lot of focus on our material gifts, right? But what a gift it is to free someone of fear, to help them, their nervous system calm, there, I noticed in our prayers over the last month, there's been a lot of surgery, right? And the gift of freeing someone from fear by our encouragement, by our prayers, by our comforting presence. Also, helping people move towards inner peace and happiness. I personally think that is really especially valuable. I was thinking, what would Jesus feel if he visited us right about now and he walked through the mall, or he walked, through the downtown and saw all the stores with all the things? I think he'd be inclined to discourage so much consumerism. And I think he would encourage us to not be so busy and to take more time for prayer and meditation and walks in nature and singing and chanting and our spiritual communion. You know, I read a story about Socrates. Um, he's one of our greatest philosophers, and he believed that the wise person would instinctively lead a frugal life, and he even went so far as to refuse to wear shoes. He didn't live in Lake Tahoe, but but he refused to wear shoes, and yet he was constantly under the spell of the marketplace. He'd go to the marketplace often, and he'd walk around and he'd look at all the variety and magnificence of all the wares on display. And a friend once asked him why he was so intrigued with all the allures of the marketplace. And he replied, I love to go there to discover how many things I am perfectly happy without. I just, I really appreciate that because I enjoy walking downtown and looking in the windows and seeing all the creative wares and really basically seeing all the things that won't fit in my little studio apartment, right? So it's enjoyable to look at them, but I don't need to acquire them. um, it reminds me of a story that Alma, my spiritual teacher, Alma used to always tell. She would always tell this story. Almost every talk she gave, she would add on this story at the end about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great was one of one of the greatest conquerors in ancient history. And the story goes that Alexander, he had conquered most of the world by age 32. He fell seriously ill and he made a few requests from his deathbed. And he wanted the path that his body would be carried down. He wanted it strewn with gold and jewels to signify that he couldn't take all the riches of the world that he gained with him. And he wanted to be buried with his arms hanging out of the coffin as a message that we come into this world empty handed and we leave this world empty handed. And I just always wondered, why did Amma, who to me is a present day Christ in a female form, why did she always tell this story? And I think it's the same thing that Jesus was saying when he said from Matthew chapter 6, verse 19 through 21, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Now, I love to see the similar teachings from different religions. And, to me, treasures in heaven, stirring up our treasures in heaven, sound a lot like what the Buddhists call spiritual gifts, the wisdom teachings that guide us into greater compassion and greater generosity and greater freedom from attachment, and guide us to live aligned with spirit, where we're hearing that inner voice, we're feeling that inner guidance, right? And in that, we're able to live in mudita, in the spiritual joy and contentment and peace. I was also thinking treasures in heaven, they're every moment that, kindness has been shown to us or that we've shown others kindness. Um, the moments that we witness divine nature in another or we feel it in ourselves, that brings us spiritual joy. That's really unlike anything else. So another one of the qualities and the teaching on the pillars of joy is the quality of humility. I was contemplating, how does humility bring joy? And I was thinking maybe it's because it's kind of a relief when we embrace just how human we are and we have compassion for how humbling it is to see how many times we feel like, we lose our center, we fall off track, and then we find our way again and we get back on track again. I think feeling humble and having a sense of humor, those things combined is quite relieving. It reminds me of that Rumi poem, The Guest House. Rumi says it so well. He says, this being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, and some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still Treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. Ah, there's so much wisdom in that. You know, and one of Jesus's most memorable stories, probably the parable that is repeated the most is the prodigal son. You know, the way the son leaves the father, leaves the presence of spirit, leaves the spiritual home, and wanders out into the world and loses everything. And finally, you know, returns to the Father, to the Mother, Father, God, and, you know, returns to a state of spiritual awakeness, you could say. You know, it really is our story, you know, and it's not once, but perhaps many times we get lost and then we get found. Like the song Amazing Grace, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. The human journey, it's a journey of self forgetting and then self discovery. You know, it's the fall and then the redemption, you know, probably over and over and over again. And it is humbling and it takes courage. We have to keep reaching our hands out to each other and keep lifting each other up. Keep lifting each other up. So, in this sacred season that we're in, let us remember that the gifts we can offer and receive are not only material, but we can offer loving kindness and compassion and prayers to soothe those who fear, those who are suffering. We can offer the wisdom of our being, you know, through being a conscious presence, you know, through being a good listener, through being generous with our time and being centered in peace. We can offer forgiveness. I didn't get to, you know, expound on that one, but that was the fourth quality of generosity. Um, and we can remember, as Ram Dass, you know, used to always say, you know, we're all just walking each other home. We're all in this together. So I wish you and all your relations deep peace and well-being and joy and happiness in this sacred holy day season. Thank you all. Namaste.
Namaste. That was just a gorgeous talk, Kathy. Ooh.